My mom's laugh cut across the Thanksgiving table. Not a small laugh. A loud one that made everyone stop eating. You'll never own a house like your sister. She said it like she wanted the whole table to hear. My aunt stopped chewing. My cousin stared at her plate. And Ramona, my older sister, just sat there with that smirk on her face. She'll be broke forever, Ramona said, like she was just stating an obvious fact. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I just smiled. They thought that smile meant they'd won. That I was finally accepting that I'd never be good enough. They had no idea what was coming. A few weeks later, their car showed up in my driveway. My phone kept ringing and ringing. Suddenly they had questions about the life they swore I'd never build. I stood at the door of the house they said I'd never own and sent them a text. 4 words. Get off my property. But let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started. I grew up in a house where everything was about success. But not just any success, the kind my mother approved of. The kind that came with titles, salaries, and things she could brag about to her friends. Ramona was 3 years older than me, and she was perfect. I mean that literally. She did everything right. The right schools, the right job, the right husband. Every single milestone checked off exactly how my mother wanted it. And then there was me. I was the quiet one. The one who stayed up late sketching instead of studying business textbooks. The one who chose art and design when everyone told me to pick something stable. The one who never fit into the perfect mold my mother had planned out. She didn't understand me. Why would anyone choose creativity over a corporate job? Why would I rent a tiny apartment downtown instead of buying something in the suburbs? Why didn't I want the exact life she'd mapped out for me? Every family gathering was the same. Ramona's accomplishments got announced like she'd won the lottery. New promotion. New bonus. New house. New vacation home. And my mother would sit there glowing, nodding like she'd personally built Ramona from scratch. Then someone would ask about me. Usually as an afterthought. And my mother would sigh or raise her eyebrow or shake her head when I mentioned anything about my design work. Like I was embarrassing her just by existing. I kept trying though. Not to impress them, I'd given up on that years ago. I just wanted to stay connected. I kept hoping that maybe one day they'd actually see me. Really see me. I worked full-time at a creative studio. Then I'd come home and freelance until midnight, sometimes later. I'd eat dinner at my desk because the ideas kept coming and I couldn't stop. I wasn't rich. I wasn't flashy. But I was proud of what I was building, piece by piece, client by client. Then came that Thanksgiving. Someone complimented the small changes I'd made to my apartment. I'd repainted it myself, added some new shelving. Nothing major. But my mother laughed like it was the funniest joke she'd ever heard. That's when she said it. You'll never own a house like your sister. And Ramona gave me that look. The same look she'd been giving me since we were kids. The one that reminded me exactly where I ranked in this family. No ambition, my mother had whispered to my aunt once. She thought I didn't hear her. But I did. I heard everything. She chooses struggle, Ramona had said another time when I turned down a corporate job that would have crushed every creative part of me. But here's the thing. I didn't want their version of success. I wanted mine. That night hit different though. For the first time, I didn't feel that usual sting. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or defend my choices. Instead, I felt something settle inside me. Something quiet and steady. Because deep down, something had already started to shift. I drove home that night with their words replaying in my head. Broke forever. Like they'd already decided my entire future for me. But somewhere between the highway and my apartment building, something clicked. I wasn't angry. Anger I knew how to handle. This was different. This was clarity. I parked my car and sat there for a minute. And I realized I wasn't hurt the way I used to be. I wasn't crushed or humiliated. I was just done. Done trying to fit into their definition of success. Done shrinking myself to make them comfortable. Done waiting for approval that was never coming. I walked upstairs, unlocked my door, and stood in the middle of my tiny living room. Sketches everywhere. Color samples pinned above my desk. Half-finished logos drying on the table. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every single client I'd earned myself. Every design I'd created. Every late night that built something real. And suddenly their opinions felt small. Smaller than the paint stains on my jeans. Smaller than everything I'd already built without their help. For the first time in my life, their words didn't define my worth. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was anxious. Because I had a purpose. I opened my laptop and looked at all the freelance inquiries I'd been putting off. I answered every single one. I raised my rates. I organized my projects. I created a new portfolio. I made a plan. Not to prove them wrong. Not to impress anyone. But to build something stable that I could actually live off without giving up who I was. My days changed. I'd work my full-time job, then come home and brew coffee and dive straight into my freelance projects. Small businesses trusted me with their branding. Startups needed someone who understood how design could change everything. Word spread faster than I expected. Within months, my client list doubled. Then tripled. Money started coming in steadily. I saved everything I could. I learned as I went. And I stopped talking to my family as much. I stopped volunteering information they never cared about anyway. When my mother sent her short, clipped messages, I'd answer when I had time. Not immediately. Not jumping to respond like I used to. Ramona kept posting her perfect life online. Vacations, designer bags, new furniture. And my mother reposted every single thing with her usual pride. But it didn't touch me anymore. That was the real shift. Not spite. Just distance. Clean, quiet distance. One night, after finishing a project that paid more in 1 week than my studio job paid in a month, I just sat back and felt something settle over me. A knowing. They had no idea what I was building. And I wasn't going to tell them until it was already done. The real turning point came on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a project when my accountant called. He paused after looking at my quarterly numbers. "Surely," he said, adjusting his glasses on the video call, "you might want to start thinking about long-term investments. You're sitting on more cash than you realize." It stunned me. Not because I didn't believe in my work, but because no one had ever talked to me like I was someone who could build something real. Not my mother. Not Ramona. Not even my dad. Hearing it from someone with no emotional stake in my life hit different. It felt like permission I didn't know I needed. That night, after I sent off my files to a client, I sat on the floor of my apartment. Plants everywhere. Color palettes spread out. The city humming outside my window. The space that used to feel like my safe haven suddenly felt too small. Not because I'd outgrown it, but because I was finally ready to want more. My version of more. Not theirs. I started looking at house listings with no real expectations. Just scrolling through condos and new builds that all looked the same. Then I saw it. Historic Victorian home in Millbrook. Something pulled me toward it. Millbrook. That was the neighborhood my mother used to drive through just to point out which houses belonged to real successful people. She'd slow down the car and say things like, "See that one? That's what hard work looks like." Always with this tone that implied I'd never get there. I clicked on the listing. Tall windows. Wraparound porch. A turret with sunlight pouring through. Original woodwork that needed restoring. It looked like it was waiting for someone to bring it back to life. The next morning, I contacted the agent. That's how I met Miss Lingard. She had silver hair, wore a sharp blazer, and had the kindest eyes. She didn't look me up and down like so many others had. She didn't ask if I had a cosigner or question whether I could afford it. She only asked one thing. "What are you looking for in a home?" I told her the truth. Something with history. Something that feels like it was waiting for me. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then you should see it in person." Walking through that house felt surreal. The floors creaked. The stained glass scattered colors across the walls. The turret opened into this circular room that felt like the perfect office where ideas could breathe. It needed work. Updating, repairing, restoring. But I wasn't intimidated. I felt ready. The owner, Mrs. Vivian Russell, was an older woman with white hair and sharp eyes. She walked through the house with me, touching the walls like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. She asked me only one question. Will you love it? Not can you afford it? Not why this house? Not what do you do for a living? Just that. And when I said yes, when I really meant it, something in her face softened. She smiled at me like she knew something I didn't yet. Good, she said. This house deserves someone who'll love it back. 2 weeks later, after negotiations and inspections and so many signatures, I held the keys. I didn't tell my family. I didn't need their opinions contaminating something that finally felt pure. I started renovating. I worked long hours, balancing client deadlines with decisions about paint colors and light fixtures. I learned about restoration techniques from YouTube videos. I talked to contractors who actually listened to my vision instead of dismissing it. With every tile I chose, every wall I repaired, every room I brought back to life, I felt my whole world expanding. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. This was about creating something that was mine. The renovations finished on a Saturday morning. One of those perfect days where the air feels lighter. I walked through every room barefoot. The floors were warm. The kitchen smelled like fresh paint. The turret room glowed with morning sun, and the stained glass scattered colors everywhere. For the first time in my life, I felt fully settled. Not finished. Just settled. Like I'd finally stepped into the version of myself I'd been reaching for all these years. I moved in quietly. No announcements. No posts. Just me, my boxes, and a home that felt like it understood me. I put my sketchbooks on the built-in shelves. Hung my favorite prints above the mantel. Stood on the wraparound porch until the sky turned dark. 2 weeks later, the calls started. My mother called first. Her voice was somewhere between suspicious and disbelieving. Shirley, your sister said you've been telling people you bought a house. Is that true? There it was. Not congratulations. Not I'm happy for you. Just accusation. It's true, I said. Where? Millbrook. Silence. Heavy, stunned silence. I could practically hear her brain trying to process it. Finally, she exhaled. Impossible. That word stung more than the laugh at Thanksgiving. Because it meant she genuinely believed I was lying. That the idea of me succeeding was so far outside her reality that it couldn't be true. Then, like she suddenly remembered I was her daughter, send the address. We're coming to see it. I almost laughed. After years of putting me down, dismissing everything I did, questioning my worth, she said it like it was her right. Like she was entitled to walk through something she never believed I could build. But I gave her the address anyway. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just wanted them to see the truth of who I'd become without them. I didn't prepare anything for their visit. No explanations. No documents. No proof that I'd earned this. For the first time ever, I felt no urge to justify myself. An hour later, I was in the turret room working on color samples for a client when my phone lit up. Then again. And again. Call after call from my mother. Then Ramona. Texts from both of them. Then more calls. I didn't answer. I walked downstairs. Through the stained glass window, I saw movement outside. A car pulling up. Doors slamming. Voices overlapping. They were here. I stood by the doorway as their shadows crossed the porch. Ramona knocked first. Quick and impatient. Shirley, open the door. Another knock. Heavier this time. Shirley, stop acting ridiculous, my mother snapped. We're here. Let us in. They weren't asking. They were commanding. The same way they always had. Like my boundaries didn't matter. Like this was still their show to run. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched their silhouettes shift behind the glass. My phone lit up again. More calls. More texts. Each notification reminded me of every single year I'd spent trying to earn their approval. Every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every moment I'd swallowed my hurt so they could feel comfortable. I walked to the window at the far end of the hallway. From there, I could see the driveway. Long and clean, lined with old oak trees. Their car sitting at the bottom. They stepped off the porch, pacing now. Calling again. The urgency twisted into something almost frantic. I could feel it radiating off them. Not because they cared about me, but because they couldn't understand a version of my life that didn't revolve around them. That didn't need their approval or validation. It hit me how surreal this was. These were the same people who laughed at a dinner table that I'd never own a home. The same ones who declared I'd be broke forever. The same ones who never noticed me quietly building a life that didn't need their approval anymore. Ramona called again. Surely, this is childish. Just open the door. I let it ring out. Another text from my mother. We're waiting. Come outside. For years, that tone would have sent me scrambling. Running to prove I was worthy of basic respect. Jumping through hoops just to feel like I mattered. But standing in my own home, surrounded by walls I chose and floors I refinished and space I claimed, something clicked into place. I picked up my phone. I opened a new message. I typed slowly, deliberately. Get off my property. 4 words. Clean, final, unshakable. I watched them both look down at their phones at the same time. First confusion, then shock, then disbelief as they lifted their eyes back toward the house. I stepped deeper into the hallway where the shadows hid me. A small, calm smile formed on my lips. They didn't knock again. They didn't call my name. They just stood there, staring at the house they said I'd never own, trying to make sense of a boundary I had every right to draw. Ramona turned first. Her posture rigid, like someone had slapped her. My mother hesitated longer, glancing back at the porch like she was waiting for me to change my mind. Like she couldn't believe I was actually doing this. I didn't. They walked to the car. The engine started. The gravel shifted under their tires as they backed out of my driveway. And with each slow turn of the wheels, a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying just lifted. They weren't gone forever. But their control over my life was. I stood alone in the foyer. Light shifting across the floorboards. The house settling around me with small, gentle sounds. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the person I'd become. Full of the future I'd built with my own hands. Full of the peace that comes when you stop asking people to treat you better and just walk into a life where you're already enough. That was the day the past ended. And the day my life truly began. In the days after they left, the silence from my family felt different. Not like something was missing. More like something had cleared. Like I'd opened all the windows in my life and let fresh air in for the first time. No demands. No comparisons. No reminders of where I supposedly ranked. Just space. The kind I'd never been allowed to claim before. A week later, Ramona sent an email. Not defensive. Not superior. Just human. She admitted that the confidence she'd always shown wasn't real. It was insecurity wearing a mask. She said watching me build something on my own terms forced her to look at her own life. And she realized how hollow it felt, performing for approval instead of living for herself. She wrote that she'd married the man my mother approved of, not the one she loved. That she'd taken the job that looked good on paper but made her miserable every single day. That she'd bought the house in the neighborhood my mother wanted, not where she actually wanted to live. I don't know who I am without their approval, she wrote. But watching you walk away from it. I think I'm starting to figure it out. My mother's message came after that. Shorter. Shakier. She didn't try to justify anything. She just said she was trying to understand how her version of love had turned into pressure heavy enough to push me away. She said she'd been so focused on what she thought success should look like that she never stopped to ask what I wanted. "I'm sorry," she wrote at the end. 2 words I'd waited my whole life to hear. I didn't rush to answer either of them. Healing doesn't sprint. It walks. Sometimes it crawls. And that's okay. But for the first time, I wasn't responding from fear or desperation. I was responding from a home that held me, from a life I'd shaped without their permission. When I finally wrote back, I didn't promise we'd be close again. I didn't say everything was forgiven. I promised honesty, and boundaries, and the space to figure out what our relationship could look like if we started over from scratch. And that was enough to start something new. If this story taught me anything, it's that boundaries aren't walls keeping people out. They're doors you learn to guard. I built a life they said I'd never have, and I did it completely on my own terms. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth when the people who should have seen it first didn't. Sometimes the best revenge is just building a life so good, you don't need their approval anymore.